The moment I fired up my Firewood processor at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, I knew someone would complain. But I never imagined it would turn into a full-blown war with the HOA president, who seemed to have nothing better to do than make my life miserable. I had just moved to Cedar Ridge Estates in northern Idaho 3 months earlier, buying a beautiful 5-acre property with mountain views and plenty of space to finally live the life I wanted. My name is Owen Patterson, and after 20 years of working construction in Seattle, I had saved enough to buy this place outright and start my small firewood business on the side. The property came with a workshop, and I had invested nearly $15,000 in a professional firewood processor that could cut, split, and stack wood efficiently. Living in Idaho, firewood was always in demand, especially with winter approaching fast. The machine was loud, sure, but not unreasonably so. It sounded like a chainsaw mixed with a hydraulic press, which is essentially what it was. I had checked the county ordinances before purchasing it, and there was no noise restriction during daytime hours in our unincorporated area. The HOA rules I had received when I bought the house mentioned quiet hours from 10 at night until 7 in the morning, which I respected completely. I never ran equipment outside those hours, not even my lawn mower. That first Tuesday morning, I had been running the processor for maybe 45 minutes when I saw a silver Lexus SUV pulling up my long driveway. I did not recognize the vehicle, but I shut down the machine anyway, pulling off my safety glasses and work gloves as a woman who looked to be in her mid-50s stepped out. She wore white capri pants, a flowing turquoise blouse, and oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. "Hi there," I called out, walking toward her with what I hoped was a friendly smile. "Can I help you?" She removed her sunglasses dramatically, and I could see the irritation written all over her face. "I certainly hope so. I'm Deborah Owens, president of the Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I've received multiple complaints about the noise coming from your property this morning." I glanced at my watch. It was 9:45. Multiple complaints. I only started about an hour ago, and it's well within the allowed hours according to the HOA documents I received. "The allowed hours are for reasonable noise," Deborah said, her voice sharp. "Lawn mowers, leaf blowers, that sort of thing. Not industrial equipment. What exactly are you doing here?" I gestured toward the processor and the pile of logs waiting to be cut. "Running a firewood business. I process firewood for sale. It's all legal, properly permitted with the county, and I'm following all the noise ordinances." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is a residential community, Mr. Patterson. We have standards here. You cannot run a business out of your home, especially not one that creates this level of disturbance." "Actually, I can," I said, trying to keep my tone polite. "I checked with the county before I started. Home-based businesses are allowed in unincorporated areas as long as they meet certain criteria, which mine does. And the noise ordinance clearly states that construction and equipment noise is permitted between 7 in the morning and 10 at night." "The HOA has stricter rules than the county," Deborah insisted. "You signed a contract when you purchased this property agreeing to abide by our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I suggest you review them immediately and cease this operation." I had reviewed them, multiple times actually. "Madam, with all due respect, I did read through everything. There's nothing in there that prohibits home businesses or specifies what type of noise is acceptable during daytime hours. Just quiet hours at night, which I follow religiously." She pulled out her phone and started typing something. "We'll see about that. I'm documenting this conversation and the violation. You'll be receiving a formal notice within 48 hours. If you continue operating this equipment, you'll face fines. Fines for what exactly? I was starting to get frustrated now. I'm not violating anything. Disturbing the peace, operating a business without HOA approval, and creating a public nuisance, she rattled off as if she had been preparing this list. $500 per violation per day. I felt my jaw clench. You can't just make up violations and fine me for them. I don't make them up, Mr. Patterson. I enforce the rules that everyone agreed to follow when they chose to live in this community. She put her sunglasses back on. I strongly suggest you find another location for your business activities. Cedar Ridge Estates is not the place for this type of operation. She got back in her Lexus and drove away before I could respond further. I stood there in my driveway, dust settling around my boots, wondering what I had just gotten myself into. I had specifically chosen a property with acreage to avoid these kinds of conflicts, but apparently that was not enough. I went inside and dug out all my HOA documents, spreading them across my kitchen table. I spent the next 2 hours reading through every single page, highlighting and taking notes. There was absolutely nothing that prohibited what I was doing. The business restriction clause only applied to businesses that generated significant traffic, which mine did not. Customers either picked up their firewood orders, or I delivered them. I might have 2 or 3 pickups per week, if that. The noise clause was exactly as I remembered. Quiet hours from 10 at night to 7 in the morning. Nothing about types of noise or decibel levels during the day. I took photos of the relevant pages and emailed them to myself, just to have a backup. 2 days later, true to her word, I received a certified letter from the Cedar Ridge Estates HOA. It was 3 pages long, typed in formal legal language, and outlined exactly what Deborah had threatened. I was being fined $1,500 for 3 violations. Operating a business without HOA approval, creating excessive noise during community hours, and failing to maintain neighborhood standards. Each violation would continue to accrue $500 per day until I ceased operations. The letter also demanded that I appear before the HOA board at their next meeting in 1 week to address these issues. Failure to appear would result in additional fines and potential legal action. I called my real estate attorney the same day. Her name was Patricia Green, and she had handled my property purchase. I explained the situation and emailed her copies of everything. "Owen, this is ridiculous," she said after reviewing the documents. "They have no legal standing for any of these fines. The county ordinances supersede HOA rules when it comes to business operations and noise regulations. You're well within your rights." "So what do?" I asked. "Just ignore them." "No, definitely respond. I'll draft a letter explaining that you're in compliance with all county regulations and that the HOA is overstepping its authority. We'll cite the specific ordinances and case law, but I want you to attend that meeting. I'll go with you." "Will that cost me a fortune in legal fees?" I was already worried about the business startup costs, and adding lawyer fees was not in my budget. "Initial consultation and letter are on the house since I handled your closing," Patricia said. "If this escalates beyond that, we'll talk about fees." But honestly, once they get a letter from an attorney, they usually back down. HOAs like to throw their weight around, but they don't want actual legal trouble. I felt slightly better after hanging up, but the anxiety remained. I had worked too hard to start this business and buy this property to let some power-hungry HOA president shut me down. The following Tuesday, I decided to run my processor again. I had orders to fill, and I was not going to let empty threats stop me from earning a living. I started at 8 in the morning, processing a large order of pine and fir that a customer needed for their rental cabins. I had been working for about 30 minutes when I saw the Lexus again, but this time it was followed by a sheriff's patrol car. My heart sank. Deborah had actually called the cops on me. I shut down the machine and waited. Deborah stayed in her vehicle while a deputy got out and walked over. He was young, maybe late 20s, and he looked more tired than anything else. "Morning," he said. "I'm Deputy Marshal. Got a complaint about noise violation. You the property owner?" "Yes, sir, Owen Patterson." I shook his hand. "I'm running a firewood processing business here. I have all the county permits and I'm operating within the legal noise ordinance hours." Deputy Marshal glanced back at Deborah's vehicle, then at my setup. "Mind if I see those permits?" "Not at all. Come inside, I have everything in a folder." I brought him into my kitchen and showed him my business license, my county permits, and the noise ordinance printout I had obtained from the county website. He looked through everything carefully, occasionally nodding. "This all looks in order," he finally said. "What time did you start this morning?" 8 o'clock. I never run anything before 7 or after 10 at night." He pulled out a small notebook. "And the complaint states you're violating HOA rules. You have those?" I showed him the HOA documents with my highlighted sections. He read through them, taking his time. "Okay, so here's the thing," Deputy Marshal said, closing the folder. "The HOA president out there claims you're breaking noise ordinances and community standards, but from what I can see, you're following all county regulations. The county noise ordinance is what we enforce, not HOA rules. Those are civil matters between you and the association. So I'm not violating anything." I needed to hear him say it clearly. "Not according to county law. The noise ordinance in unincorporated areas like this only restricts certain activities between 10 at night and 7 in the morning. What you're doing during daytime hours is completely legal. Now, if you were running this at midnight, we'd have a problem. But at 8 in the morning." He shook his head. "No violation." Relief washed over me. "Can you tell her that?" "I'll explain the situation," he said. "But I have to tell you, HOA disputes can get messy. They might try to fine you or take civil action. That's not something we get involved with unless it becomes harassment or trespassing. You might want to consult with a lawyer." "I already have," I said. "She's sending them a letter." Deputy Marshal nodded approvingly. "Smart move. Let me go talk to Mrs. Owens." I followed him outside but kept my distance. Through the open window of the Lexus, I could hear Deborah's voice rising as the deputy explained the situation. "But he's disturbing the entire neighborhood," she was saying. "I have complaints from 6 different households." "Madam, I understand your frustration, but there's no noise ordinance violation here," Deputy Marshal said patiently. "The county allows this type of activity during daytime hours. If you have an issue with it, that's a matter for your HOA to handle internally, but we cannot enforce HOA rules. We enforce county and state laws. This is unacceptable. What are we paying taxes for if you won't respond to clear violations?" "I did respond, madam. I investigated the complaint thoroughly. Mr. Patterson is in full compliance with all applicable laws and ordinances. There's nothing more I can do here." Deborah's face was turning red, visible even from where I stood. "I want your supervisor's name and badge number. This is completely unacceptable." Deputy Marshal remained professional. "My badge number is 437, and you're welcome to speak with Sergeant Brooks at the station. But I assure you, he'll tell you the same thing. No ordinance applies here during these hours." He handed her a card through the window, then walked back to his patrol car. Before getting in, he gave me a brief nod. "You're all set, Mr. Patterson. Have a good day." "Thank you, officer," I called out. As the patrol car pulled away, Deborah got out of her Lexus. Her face was tight with anger. "This isn't over, Mr. Patterson, not by a long shot. The HOA board will be hearing about this, and trust me, we have ways of dealing with people who refuse to be good neighbors." "I am being a good neighbor," I said, my own frustration bubbling up. "I'm following every rule, every law, every ordinance. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to show some consideration for the people who live around you," she snapped. "I want you to understand that this is a community, not your personal industrial park, and I want you to realize that choices have consequences." The thinly veiled threat was clear. She got back in her vehicle and sped down my driveway fast enough to kick up a cloud of dust and gravel. I stood there for a moment, then went back to work. I had a business to run, and I was not going to let her intimidate me. The rest of the week was quiet, thankfully. I processed wood every day, filling orders and building up inventory for the winter season. A few neighbors drove by slowly, clearly checking out what I was doing, but no one else complained directly. Then came the HOA board meeting. Patricia met me at the community center, a small building near the entrance of Cedar Ridge Estates. It was 7 in the evening, and there were already a dozen cars in the parking lot. "Ready for this?" Patricia asked, carrying her briefcase. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. Inside, folding chairs were set up in rows facing a long table where 5 board members sat. Deborah was in the center, of course, looking like she was holding court. To her right was a balding man in his 60s who appeared to be half asleep, and to her left was a younger woman taking notes. The other 2 board members were men I had never seen before. Several of my neighbors were in attendance, and I recognized a few faces from when I had first moved in. Most looked curious rather than hostile, which I took as a good sign. Deborah called the meeting to order and went through standard business, approving last month's minutes and discussing some landscaping issues at the entrance. Then she got to my item on the agenda. "Next we have the matter of Mr. Owen Patterson and his violation of community standards," she announced, looking directly at me. "Mr. Patterson, would you like to come forward and address the board?" Patricia and I walked to the front together. She introduced herself as my legal counsel, which seemed to surprise Deborah. "The board has outlined several violations," Deborah continued, consulting her papers. "Operating a business without HOA approval, excessive noise disturbance, and failure to maintain community standards. We've documented these violations and assessed appropriate fines. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Patricia spoke before I could. "Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. I've reviewed your allegations and the relevant documents, and I must inform you that my client is not in violation of any HOA covenants, conditions, or restrictions. The business operation clause in your CCRs specifically prohibits businesses that generate significant vehicular traffic or create hazardous conditions. Mr. Patterson's firewood processing business does neither." "That's your interpretation," Deborah said coolly. "Our interpretation is different." "Interpretation doesn't matter when the language is clear," Patricia replied. "Additionally, regarding the noise complaints, Mr. Patterson operates his equipment only during hours that are explicitly permitted by both your HOA documents and county ordinance. County ordinance supersedes HOA rules in matters of noise regulation, as confirmed by the sheriff's deputy who responded to your complaint." One of the male board members, a guy with graying hair and glasses, spoke up. "Mrs. Green, I appreciate your perspective, but we have received multiple complaints from residents. The board has a responsibility to address those concerns." "I understand that, Mr." Patricia paused, waiting for his name. "Henderson. Tom Henderson." Mr. Henderson, I understand the board's position, but you cannot fine a homeowner for activities that are explicitly permitted under county law and not prohibited by your own governing documents. Doing so opens the HOA up to significant legal liability. Deborah's expression hardened. Are you threatening this board with legal action? I'm informing the board of the legal reality, Patricia said calmly. If you proceed with these fines and attempt to collect them, my client will have no choice but to challenge them in court. And given the clear legal standing, the HOA will likely be responsible not only for dismissal of the fines, but also for my client's legal fees. Is that really the path you want to take? The board members exchanged glances. The sleepy-looking man was suddenly more alert, and Tom Henderson was frowning at the papers in front of him. Let's hear from the community, Deborah said, changing tactics. Several residents signed a petition regarding this issue. Mrs. Carmichael, would you like to speak? An elderly woman in the second row stood up, clutching her purse. I live 3 properties down from Mr. Patterson, and I can hear his machinery from my back porch. It's very disruptive to my morning routine. I like to have my coffee outside and enjoy the peace and quiet. Now I have to listen to that awful noise. A few people murmured in agreement. Patricia nodded sympathetically. Mrs. Carmichael, I understand that's frustrating, but living in a community means accepting that neighbors will engage in various lawful activities. People mow their lawns, use leaf blowers, have construction work done. Mr. Patterson's business operates on the same principle. He's working during permitted hours and following all regulations. But this is every day, another voice called out. It's not like mowing the lawn once a week. I decided it was time to speak up. If I could address that. I don't run the processor every single day, and when I do, it's typically for 3 to 4 hours maximum. I have to make a living just like everyone else. I specifically bought a property with acreage so I'd have space to operate without bothering people. I'm doing everything I can to be respectful while still running my business. Why can't you do this somewhere else? Someone asked. Rent an industrial space or something. Because this is my property and I have the legal right to operate here, I said. And frankly, renting commercial space would make my business financially unviable. I'm not a big corporation. I'm just a guy trying to make an honest living. Deborah jumped back in. The issue, Mr. Patterson, is that you're prioritizing your business over the quality of life for dozens of families in this community. That shows a fundamental lack of consideration. No, the issue is that you're trying to shut down a legal business because a few people don't like the sound. I shot back, feeling my temper rise. I've followed every rule. I've done everything by the book. And instead of trying to find a reasonable compromise, you've threatened me with thousands of dollars in bogus fines and called the police on me like I'm some kind of criminal. Mr. Patterson, please control yourself, Deborah said sharply. Outbursts like this only prove that you're not willing to work with the community. Patricia put a hand on my arm. Let me handle this. What Mr. Patterson is expressing, albeit emotionally, is a valid frustration. This board has acted precipitously and without proper legal foundation. Rather than continue this contentious discussion, I propose a solution. Mr. Patterson is willing to limit his operating hours even further than required. He'll commit to running equipment no earlier than 8 in the morning and no later than 6 in the evening, and no more than 4 hours per day. In exchange, the board will withdraw all fines and acknowledge his right to operate his business on his property. I looked at Patricia in surprise. We had not discussed this beforehand, but it actually seemed reasonable. Those hours would work fine for me, and it would give neighbors more quiet time in the evening. Tom Henderson spoke again. That seems like a fair compromise. We'd be getting restrictions beyond what the ordinance requires, and it addresses the concern about constant noise. Absolutely not, Deborah said. This sets a terrible precedent. If we allow this, what's to stop every homeowner from starting some kind of business and turning this neighborhood into a commercial zone? The CCRs already allow home businesses under certain conditions, Patricia pointed out. This doesn't set any new precedent. The young woman taking notes leaned over and whispered something to Deborah, who looked increasingly irritated. I'd like to call for a board vote, Tom Henderson said. All in favor of accepting the compromise, raise your hand. Tom raised his hand immediately. The sleepy-looking man raised his hand after a moment's hesitation. The note-taking woman looked conflicted but eventually raised hers as well. Motion passes 3-2, Tom announced. Mr. Patterson, as long as you adhere to those hours and the 4-hour daily limit, you're free to operate. All fines are hereby dismissed. Deborah looked furious but said nothing. The fifth board member, who had not voted either way, just shrugged. Thank you, I said, relief flooding through me. I appreciate the board's willingness to find a solution. The meeting moved on to other business, but Patricia and I left shortly after. In the parking lot, she gave me a satisfied smile. That went better than expected, she said. Deborah clearly wanted to make an example of you, but the other board members were more reasonable. I can't believe she voted against a compromise, I said. What's her problem? Power, Patricia said simply. She's used to getting her way and you challenged her authority. People like that don't handle it well. But legally, you're in the clear now. Just make sure you stick to those hours we agreed to. I will, I promised. Thank you for your help. What do I owe you? Like I said, this one's on the house. You've been through enough. She got into her car, but call me if there are any more problems. Something tells me Deborah isn't done yet. Patricia was right to be concerned. Over the next 2 weeks, things seemed to settle down. I stuck religiously to the new hours, even though technically I could have pushed them. I wanted to show good faith and avoid any further conflict. Then I started noticing little things. My mailbox got knocked over one night. I assumed it was kids or an accident, so I fixed it. A few days later, someone left a pile of trash at the end of my driveway. Again, I cleaned it up without much thought, but then it got weirder. I came home from a supply run one afternoon to find that someone had filed a complaint with the county about my business, claiming I was storing hazardous materials on my property. A county inspector showed up the next day, confused because there were obviously no hazardous materials, just stacks of firewood. Who filed the complaint? I asked the inspector, a friendly guy named Mike. Anonymous, he said, making a notation on his clipboard. But between you and me, we've been getting a lot of frivolous complaints from this HOA area lately. Someone's weaponizing the system. I knew exactly who that someone was. The harassment continued. I received a citation for my truck being parked on the street overnight, even though it was in my driveway. Someone called animal control claiming I had aggressive dogs, which I did not have any pets at all. Each incident required time and energy to resolve, and it was clearly a coordinated effort to make my life difficult. I documented everything, taking photos and keeping a detailed log with dates and times. After the 5th false complaint in 3 weeks, I called Patricia again. This is harassment, she said after I explained everything. And if we can prove it's coming from Deborah or the HOA, we can take legal action. How do we prove it? I asked. That's the tricky part. Anonymous complaints are hard to trace, but keep documenting everything. If there's a pattern, we can make a case. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My neighbor 2 properties over, A retired school teacher named Margaret knocked on my door one evening. She was in her 70s, friendly, and always waved when she drove by. "Owen, I need to tell you something," she said when I invited her in. "I was at Deborah's house for a book club meeting last week, and I overheard her on the phone. She was bragging to someone about how she was going to make you so miserable that you'd have no choice but to leave. She mentioned filing complaints and getting other people to do it too." My hands clenched. "Did she say anything specific?" "She talked about the trash, the mailbox, and calling in false reports to the county. She thought it was funny." Margaret looked troubled. "I don't approve of what you heard, even though the noise can be a bit much sometimes. But what she's doing is wrong, and I thought you should know." "Would you be willing to make a statement about what you heard?" I asked. Margaret hesitated. "I don't want to get involved in a legal battle." "Deborah can be very vindictive." "I understand," I said. "But if you could just write down what you heard and date it, you don't have to do anything else with it unless absolutely necessary. It would help establish a pattern." She agreed and wrote out a brief statement right there at my kitchen table. I made a copy for her records and added it to my growing file of documentation. Armed with this information, Patricia sent a strongly worded letter to both Deborah personally and the HOA board, outlining the harassment and threatening legal action if it continued. She cited specific laws regarding abuse of process and harassment, and she made it clear that we had evidence connecting Deborah to the false complaints. For about a week, everything stopped. No more incidents, no more complaints. I thought maybe the letter had done its job. Then one morning in early November, I went out to start my processor and found that someone had poured sugar in the gas tank. The machine was completely ruined. Sugar in a gas tank is an old trick, and it's devastatingly effective. The repair estimate came back at nearly $8,000, and that was if it could be repaired at all. I might need to replace the entire engine. I was furious. This had crossed the line from harassment into criminal vandalism. I called the sheriff's department immediately and filed a report. A different deputy came out, took photos, dusted for fingerprints, though we both knew that was probably futile, and gave me a case number. "Any idea who might have done this?" she asked. I explained the entire situation with the HOA and showed her my documentation file. Her expression grew more serious as she read through it. "This is pretty clear-cut harassment," she said. "I'm going to pass this up to our detective unit. They'll want to talk to you and probably interview this HOA president. Will anything actually happen?" I was skeptical after so many false complaints. "Vandalism causing this much damage is a felony," she said. "If we can connect it to someone, yes, they'll face charges. Keep your documentation organized and don't touch anything else out here until our evidence techs take another look." The investigation moved slowly, as these things do. Meanwhile, I was out my primary piece of equipment and had orders I could not fill. I had to rent time on someone else's processor an hour away, which ate into my already tight profit margins. My business was being slowly strangled, exactly as Deborah had intended. But then the detective assigned to my case, Detective Sarah Morrison, started finding connections. She pulled records of all the complaints filed against my property and cross-referenced phone numbers. Most of the anonymous calls had come from burner phones or blocked numbers, but 2 had come from Deborah's personal cell phone. She had apparently gotten careless. Detective Morrison also interviewed Margaret, who reluctantly agreed to give her statement officially. Combined with the pattern of complaints and the timing of everything, it was enough for a warrant to pull Deborah's phone records. That's when things really broke open. Deborah had been in a group text with 3 other HOA residents, coordinating the harassment campaign. The messages were incredibly damning, with explicit discussions about the mailbox, the trash, the false complaints, and finally, the suggestion that someone should do something that actually costs him money. One of the people in that group text was Carol Whitmore, a woman in her 40s who lived about half a mile from me. When Detective Morrison interviewed her, she broke down almost immediately and admitted everything. She had been the one to pour sugar in my gas tank, acting on what she claimed was just a suggestion from the group. She had not realized it would cause that much damage, or so she said. Within 48 hours of that confession, Detective Morrison arrested both Deborah and Carol. Deborah was charged with conspiracy to commit vandalism and criminal harassment. Carol faced felony vandalism charges. The two other people in the group text were also charged with conspiracy. The day I heard about the arrests, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had not even fully realized I was carrying. Patricia called me with the news. "They're both out on bail, but this is serious," she said. "Deborah could be looking at jail time if convicted, and she'll definitely lose her position with the HOA. Carol is already talking about a plea deal." "I just want to run my business in peace," I said. "And I want my equipment repaired or replaced." "That's coming," Patricia assured me. "Carol's homeowner's insurance will probably cover it, or you can sue her directly. Either way, you'll be made whole." The fallout in the neighborhood was swift and dramatic. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and Deborah was removed as president by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members. Tom Henderson took over as interim president, and one of his first acts was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the association. The local news picked up the story, which brought both negative attention to Cedar Ridge Estates and sympathy for my situation. Several new customers reached out, wanting to support my business. Some of my neighbors who had been part of the complaining group came by to apologize, admitting they had been influenced by Deborah's constant negativity. Carol Whitmore took a plea deal, pleading guilty to felony vandalism in exchange for probation, restitution, and community service. Her insurance company cut me a check for the full repair cost, plus a little extra for my lost business time. I was able to get my processor fixed and running again within a month. Deborah fought her charges, claiming she had never directly told anyone to commit vandalism and that her text messages were being taken out of context. But the prosecution had a strong case, and her lawyer eventually advised her to take a plea deal as well. She pleaded no contest to criminal harassment and conspiracy charges, receiving 6 months in county jail with the possibility of early release for good behavior, 2 years probation, and a restraining order preventing her from contacting me or coming onto my property. She also had to resign from the HOA board permanently and was prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position in the future. Her mugshot appeared in the local paper, and I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her husband was deeply embarrassed by the whole situation. The 2 other people involved in the group text received lesser charges, pleading guilty to misdemeanor harassment and receiving fines and probation. By December, life had finally settled into a routine. I ran my Firewood processor during my agreed-upon hours, and no one complained. In fact, a few neighbors asked if they could buy firewood directly from me at a discount, which I was happy to arrange. Tom Henderson proved to be a reasonable HOA president. He reached out to me personally and asked if there was anything the association could do to smooth things over. I suggested they clarify their business operation rules in the CCRs to prevent future confusion, and he agreed immediately. The updated documents made it clear that home-based businesses were allowed as long as they complied with county regulations. I also got to know my neighbors better, particularly Margaret, who felt terrible about the whole situation even though she had ultimately been the one to help me. We had coffee regularly, and she introduced me to other residents who had not been part of the harassment campaign. One cold afternoon in January, I was stacking firewood in my workshop when I saw a familiar Lexus driving slowly past my property. My first instinct was alarm, but then I realized it was not silver, it was black, and it was not Deborah. The driver waved as they passed, just a neighbor heading home. I had been on edge for so long that I had to consciously remind myself that the threat was over. Deborah was still serving her jail time, and even when she got out, she was legally barred from bothering me. The other conspirators had learned their lesson. My business was thriving, with more orders than I could easily handle. I had even hired a part-time helper, a local high school kid named Jason who wanted to learn the trade and save money for college. He worked after school and on weekends, and it was nice to have the company and the extra pair of hands. One evening in February, I got a call from Patricia with an update. Deborah's lawyer filed for early release, she said. She's served 3 months and claims she's rehabilitated and remorseful. The hearing is next week. Do you want to submit a victim impact statement? I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to oppose her release to make sure she served every day of her sentence. But another part of me just wanted to move on. Will she still be on probation if they release her early? I asked. Yes, and the restraining order remains in effect regardless. Then I don't need to submit a statement, I said. As long as she stays away from me and my property, she can do whatever she wants. That's very mature of you, Patricia said. I'm just tired of the whole thing, I admitted. I want to focus on my business and my life. She's not worth any more of my energy. Deborah was released after serving 4 months with strict probation conditions. I heard she had sold her house in Cedar Ridge Estates and moved to another town entirely. Apparently, the shame and social ostracization had been too much for her and her husband to handle. Carol Whitmore still lived in the neighborhood, and I saw her occasionally at the grocery store or gas station. She always looked away quickly, unable to meet my eyes. I did not have any particular feelings toward her anymore, just a vague sense of pity. She had let herself be manipulated into doing something stupid, and she would live with the consequences for years. By spring, Cedar Ridge Estates had moved on from the drama. There was new gossip, new conflicts, and new concerns. I was just the guy with the firewood business. Nothing more, nothing less. My business continued to grow. I invested in a second, smaller processor that I could use for specialty orders, and I expanded my delivery range to cover 3 counties. Jason stayed on part-time through the summer, and I hired another helper for the busy fall season. One warm afternoon in April, Tom Henderson stopped by to drop off some documents about an upcoming HOA vote on road maintenance. We stood in my driveway, chatting about nothing in particular when he brought up the previous year's events. "You know, I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have stood up to Deborah sooner. It was obvious she was targeting you unfairly, but I went along with it because it was easier than causing conflict." "I appreciate that," I said, "but you came around when it mattered. The compromise you pushed for at that board meeting probably saved me months of legal battles." "Still, I could have done more." He looked uncomfortable. "Deborah was a bully and I enabled her by staying silent. I won't make that mistake again." "Good," I said. "Every neighborhood needs board members who will do the right thing even when it's hard." He smiled. "The job is all yours if you want it. We have an opening." I laughed. "Thanks, but I'll pass. I've had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime." As he drove away, I looked around at my property. 5 acres of peaceful Idaho land, with mountains in the distance and enough space to run my business without bothering anyone. The firewood processor sat silent in the late afternoon sun, ready for tomorrow's work. My workshop was organized and efficient. My house was comfortable and truly mine. This was exactly what I had moved here for, what I had worked 20 years to achieve. And despite everything Deborah and her cronies had tried to do, I had made it work. The evening before, I had received an email from a new customer asking about a bulk order for a restaurant that wanted to install wood-fired pizza ovens. It was potentially my biggest contract yet, and I was meeting with them next week to discuss details. Life was good, business was good, and I had finally found my place. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, and I watched it for a moment before heading inside. Tomorrow would be another busy day, but tonight I could relax, knowing that I had fought for my rights and won. The HOA had tried to shut me down, had called the cops on me, had harassed me, and had vandalized my property. But in the end, the law had been on my side. The officer had said no noise ordinance applied during those hours, and that simple truth had been the foundation of everything that followed. I had learned a lot over those months. I had learned about standing up for yourself, about documenting everything, about finding good legal counsel, and about the importance of having neighbors who would speak the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. I had also learned that not every battle needs to be fought to the bitter end. Once I had achieved my goal of being able to operate my business in peace, I had let go of the anger and resentment. Deborah and Carol had faced consequences for their actions, but I did not need revenge beyond that. Justice was enough. As spring turned to summer, I settled into a comfortable routine. Work filled my days, and I began exploring the recreational opportunities that had drawn me to Idaho in the first place. I went hiking in the mountains, tried my hand at fishing in the nearby lakes, and even joined a local business association where I met other entrepreneurs facing their own challenges. Margaret invited me to a 4th of July barbecue at her house, and I met more of my neighbors in a relaxed, social setting. People were friendly and welcoming, and no one mentioned the HOA drama. It was ancient history, replaced by current events and everyday concerns. Jason, my high school helper, turned out to be a natural at the firewood business. He had a good eye for quality wood and learned the equipment quickly. By August, I was trusting him to handle smaller orders on his own, and he told me he was thinking about starting a similar business in his hometown after college. "You're a good teacher," he said one afternoon as we loaded a delivery truck. "I've learned more working here than I ever did in any classroom. Business is the best education there is," I told him. "You learn real consequences, real problem solving, and how to deal with all kinds of people. Even crazy HOA presidents," he joked. "Especially crazy HOA presidents," I agreed with a laugh. The restaurant contract had come through, and I was now supplying premium hardwood to 3 different establishments in the region. It was steady, reliable income that complemented my residential customers nicely. My business had grown beyond what I had initially projected, and I was able to pay off my equipment loans ahead of schedule. One September morning, almost a year after the whole ordeal had begun, I received a letter in the mail from Deborah. It had been forwarded through Patricia's office, respecting the restraining order that prohibited direct contact. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page handwritten. "Mr. Patterson," it began. "I know I have no right to contact you, even indirectly, but my therapist suggested I write this as part of my recovery process. I want you to know that I am deeply ashamed of my actions. I let my need for control and my fear of change turn me into someone I don't recognize. I hurt you, damaged your property, and caused you significant stress and financial loss. There is no excuse for what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, and I understand if you never want to hear from me again. But I wanted you to know that I take full responsibility for my actions, and I am working every day to become a better person. I hope your business is thriving and that you have found peace in your home. Sincerely, Deborah Owens. I read the letter twice, trying to figure out how I felt about it. There was no return address, no request for a response, nothing that felt manipulative. It seemed genuine, though I could not be completely sure. I showed it to Patricia the next time I saw her. "What do you think?" I asked. She read it carefully. It seems authentic, but she could just be working her probation requirements. Some judges order apology letters as part of restitution. Does it change anything for you? No, I realized. It doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change how I feel about it. But I guess I'm glad she's getting help. I filed the letter away with all the other documents from that time period. Maybe someday I would look back on all of it differently, but for now, I was content to leave it in the past. By the time the first anniversary of that initial confrontation rolled around, my life had transformed completely. My business was successful and growing. I had friends in the community. I was involved in local events, and had even joined the volunteer fire department, which gave me a sense of contributing to the place I now called home. The HOA had stabilized under Tom Henderson's leadership. They focused on actual community issues like road maintenance, snow removal, and maintaining common areas. The petty enforcement and power games had ended with Deborah's departure. I ran my Firewood processor during reasonable hours, and no one complained. The sound had become just another part of the neighborhood background noise, as familiar and unremarkable as lawn mowers or the UPS truck making deliveries. One crisp October afternoon, as I was splitting a particularly nice load of oak, I paused to look around. The leaves were changing colors, painting the hillsides in brilliant golds and reds. The air smelled like autumn, that perfect combination of wood smoke and dry leaves. My processor hummed efficiently, and my inventory was building up nicely for the busy winter season. This was what I had fought for, this peaceful, productive life. The right to work on my own property, to build something with my own hands, to be left alone to pursue my dreams without interference from petty tyrants who thought their preferences should override everyone else's rights. The Firewood business had taught me more than just how to process wood efficiently. It had taught me about perseverance, about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and legal preparation. It had taught me that most people are reasonable if you give them a chance, but some people will only respond to firm boundaries and legal consequences. Most importantly, it had taught me that home is not just a place you buy. It is a place you fight for, a place you earn through persistence and principle. Cedar Ridge Estates was truly my home now, not because the HOA had welcomed me, but because I had refused to be driven out. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across my property, I shut down the processor for the day. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new challenges, new opportunities. But tonight, I would enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had built something good here, something lasting, something worth fighting for. The officer had been right that day when he said no noise ordinance applied. Such a simple statement, but it had been the key that unlocked everything else. Without that confirmation, without that official validation that I was operating within my rights, the whole situation might have gone differently. I walked back to my house, pulled a beer from the fridge, and sat on my back porch watching the sunset. The hawk I had seen so often was making a final sweep of the area before roosting for the night. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of children playing in someone's yard, and farther still, the low rumble of a freight train heading south through the valley. These were the sounds of a living community, of people going about their lives, of normalcy and peace. This was what I had wanted when I left Seattle, and this was what I had achieved despite every obstacle thrown in my path. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason asking about tomorrow's schedule. I sent him the details, then put the phone away. Work could wait until morning. Right now, I just wanted to sit here and appreciate how far I had come. The legal bills had been paid. The equipment was repaired and running better than ever. The business was profitable and growing. The neighbors were friendly. The HOA was functional and reasonable. And somewhere out there, Deborah was hopefully learning to be a better person. It had been a long, difficult journey from that first morning when she pulled into my driveway with her complaints and threats. But I had come through it stronger, wiser, and more confident in my ability to handle whatever challenges life might throw at me. As darkness settled over the property, I finished my beer and headed inside. Tomorrow would begin with the familiar sound of my Firewood processor starting up at 8 in the morning, exactly as it should be. And if anyone had a problem with that, well, I knew exactly what to do. The story could have ended differently. I could have backed down, sold the property, given up on my business and my dreams. Many people would have. The pressure, the harassment, the constant stress of fighting with the HOA, it would have been easier to just walk away. But I had not come this far in life by taking the easy path. 20 years of construction work had taught me that anything worth building requires patience, persistence, and the willingness to face problems head-on. A house does not build itself, and neither does a life. I thought about all the people who had helped along the way. Patricia with her legal expertise and willingness to take on my case. Deputy Marshal and Detective Morrison, who had taken my complaints seriously and investigated thoroughly. Margaret, who had risked social backlash to tell the truth about what she had heard. Tom Henderson, who had found the courage to stand up for what was right. Even Jason, who had given me someone to mentor and a reason to keep pushing forward. None of us accomplish anything truly worthwhile alone. We all need allies, supporters, people who believe in us and are willing to help when times get tough. I had been fortunate to find those people here in Cedar Ridge Estates, even amidst the conflict. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for working. I bundled up in my work coat, made a strong pot of coffee, and headed out to the workshop. The processor started on the first pull, its engine settling into that familiar rhythm that meant money in the bank and orders being filled. Jason arrived right on schedule, and we spent the morning working through a large order for a local resort. The wood needed to be split into specific sizes, stacked in particular ways, and delivered by the weekend. It was the kind of detailed work that required focus and teamwork, and we fell into an easy rhythm. Around noon, a truck I did not recognize pulled up the driveway. I shut down the processor and walked over to meet the driver, a middle-aged man in work clothes. "You Owen Patterson?" he asked. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "Name's Frank Miller. I own a landscaping company about 30 miles from here. Heard about you from the Johnsons over at Mountain View Resort. They said you do good work at fair prices and you've got quality wood." I shook his hand. "Thanks, I try." "What are you looking for?" "I've got several clients who want to add fire pits to their properties," Frank explained. "I need a reliable supplier who can deliver different types of wood depending on what the client wants. Some want pine for the smell, Others want hardwood for longer burning, that kind of thing. Could you handle that? Absolutely, I said. I can source pretty much any type of wood you need, and my delivery range covers most of the region. Want to come see my inventory? We spent the next hour discussing his needs, looking at samples and talking logistics. By the time he left, I had a new commercial account that would add significant regular income to my business. This was the kind of growth I had been hoping for. That looked like a good meeting, Jason observed as Frank drove away. Really good, I confirmed. This could open up a whole new market segment for us. Commercial landscaping companies always need wood suppliers. So I guess the HOA didn't manage to shut you down after all, Jason said with a grin. Not even close, I agreed. If anything, all that drama probably helped in the long run. The news coverage gave me free publicity, and people like supporting someone who stood up to bullies. It was true. Several of my newer customers had specifically mentioned seeing the story about the HOA harassment in the local paper, and it had made them want to support my business. There was a certain irony in that. Deborah's campaign to destroy me had actually helped me succeed. The months continued to pass, each bringing new challenges and new successes. Winter was brutal that year, with heavy snow and temperatures well below zero. But that meant everyone needed firewood, and my phone rang constantly with orders. I hired 2 more part-time employees to help with delivery, and I rented a larger truck to handle the increased volume. Through it all, the HOA situation remained blessedly quiet. The new board was focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. They sent out reasonable newsletters about snow removal and holiday decorating guidelines, nothing that felt oppressive or overreaching. I even agreed to serve on a committee to review and update the HOA's CCRs, helping to ensure that the language was clear and reasonable for everyone. It felt good to contribute positively to the community that had put me through so much. One evening in March, almost 18 months after everything started, I sat down to review my business finances. The numbers were extraordinary. My revenue had tripled compared to my initial projections. I had 5 regular commercial accounts and dozens of residential customers. My equipment was paid off, and I was actually putting money into savings. More than that, I had built something sustainable and scalable. The business model worked, the customer base was strong, and the operations were efficient. If I wanted to, I could probably expand into neighboring regions or even franchise the model to other entrepreneurs. But for now, I was content with what I had built. A successful business on my own property, doing work I enjoyed, serving customers who appreciated quality and reliability. It was exactly what I had dreamed of when I left Seattle. I thought about Deborah sometimes, wondering how she was doing, whether she had actually changed. I had heard through the grapevine that she and her husband had divorced, and she was living in a condo in Boise, working some kind of administrative job. Her fall from HOA president to convicted criminal to divorced and relocated had been dramatic and complete. I did not take any pleasure in her misfortune. What she had done was wrong, and she had paid the consequences, but I did not need to gloat about it. I had won by succeeding despite her efforts, not by seeing her fail. As spring turned to summer again, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. 2 years ago, I had been working construction in Seattle, dreaming of this life. 1 year ago, I had been fighting for my right to operate my business. Now, I was an established business owner, a respected member of my community, and someone who had proven that standing up for your rights, even against difficult opposition, was worth the fight. The firewood processor still ran during the same hours, making the same sounds. But now those sounds represented victory rather than conflict, success rather than struggle. When I heard the engine start each morning, it was a reminder that I had fought for this, earned this, and no one could take it away from me. Late one Sunday afternoon, I was cleaning up the workshop when Tom Henderson stopped by. He had become a friend over the months, and we occasionally grabbed dinner or watched sports together. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." "What's up?" "I'm stepping down as HOA president," he said. "My company is transferring me to Montana, so we're selling the house. The board asked me to see if you'd consider taking over." I laughed. "I already told you I'm not interested in HOA politics." I know, but hear me out." Tom leaned against my workbench. "You've got credibility with everyone. The people who supported you respect your principles, and the people who opposed you respect that you won fair and square. You could really make a difference. Ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." I considered it. The idea of serving as HOA president had seemed ridiculous a year ago, but maybe Tom had a point. I could help make sure the association served the community rather than controlling it. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Sure. We're voting next month. Just let me know." After he left, I thought about his proposal seriously. Being HOA president would take time away from my business, but it would also give me a chance to shape the community's direction. I could make sure the rules were fair, the enforcement was reasonable, and the board worked for the residents rather than the other way around. In the end, I decided to run for the position. Not because I wanted power or control, but because I wanted to prevent future Deborahs from abusing their authority. My campaign platform was simple: reasonable rules, transparent enforcement, and respect for property rights. I won by a wide margin, with even some of the people who had originally complained about my business voting for me. It seemed that my fight against unreasonable HOA overreach had resonated with more residents than I realized. As HOA president, I implemented several changes. We simplified the CCRs, removing vague language that could be interpreted multiple ways. We established clear appeal procedures for anyone who disagreed with board decisions. We created term limits to prevent anyone from staying in power too long. And we committed to quarterly community meetings where residents could voice concerns directly. Running a firewood business and managing an HOA kept me busy, but it was fulfilling work. I was building both a livelihood and a community, and that felt meaningful. Years later, when people asked me about the HOA situation, I would tell them the whole story. How a HOA president called the cops on my firewood processor hours, how the officer said no noise ordinance applied, and how that simple truth had sparked a battle that ended with criminal charges, personal growth, and unexpected leadership opportunities. The story always resonated with people because everyone has experienced some form of unreasonable authority, whether it is an HOA, a boss, or a bureaucrat. People understood the frustration of being told you cannot do something that is perfectly legal and reasonable. And they appreciated hearing about someone who stood up, fought back, and won. My firewood processor still runs every morning that I have orders to fill. The sound echoes across my 5 acres of Idaho land, carrying with it the memory of everything it took to earn the right to make that sound. It's the sound of freedom, of success, of standing up for what's right. And every time I hear it, I remember that morning when Deputy Marshal looked at the county ordinances and said those magic words, "No noise ordinance applies here." Those 5 words had changed everything, giving me the legal foundation I needed to fight back and ultimately prevail. The business continues to grow, the community continues to thrive, and I continue to process firewood on my property without interference. That's all I ever wanted, and that's exactly what I got. Sometimes standing up for yourself works out exactly the way it should, and this was one of those times.